Tonight we're delighted to have 4 authors, and before we commence I would just like to thank once again their respective arts councils and embassies and everybody who's helping. That's from Wales and Catalan, Spain, and from Lithuania and from Luxembourg. A very big thank you to them for helping facilitate and organise and deliver their writers to this faraway land where they come. It's great to have them here with us. Tonight our moderator is an old friend of the Bookworm, Alexandra Büchler, who runs this great organisation called Literature Across Frontiers that promotes understanding through literary translation and dialogue and workshops and a whole range of projects that they coordinate that are promoting emerging writers in Europe. She does dynamic work. She's a hero of mine. Can you please welcome her? Alexandra Büchler. To stage.
So, shall we come on stage? Thank you very much, Peter. No, actually, Peter is my hero, and his team. Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here again. We started working with the Bookworm Festival 3 years ago, and I think our cooperation has been going from strength to strength. As Peter said, my organization is called Literature Across Frontiers, and we have a project called Literary Europe Live, through which we promote European writing across Europe and also outside Europe, in China now, and also in countries like India, for example. I will introduce our speakers here. We have 4 of them, so it's quite a big panel. And what they have in common is that not only that they are Europeans, and they obviously see themselves as part of the European literary scene, but that they each write in what could be called a small or minor or minority or minoritized language. And this is something that we also want to talk about apart from talking about their work. So I'll introduce them from my far right. Jordi Punti is from Catalonia. Catalonia, as you will know, is part of Spain. It's a country which has a degree of autonomy, but it's not independent. This may happen in the future. And so Jordi writes in Catalan, but he also writes in Spanish. He writes journalism, and he very much sort of uses the 2 languages really on an everyday basis. He has published 4 books. 2 of them are collections of short stories, and one is a collection of texts which are basically memoirs of a childhood of a Catalan child living in an industrial town which has been receiving quite a few immigrants from the south. So basically Spanish people and or Castilians, as they are called when we refer to them in Spanish or Catalan. And so this book is about the sort of tensions between the Catalan kids and the Spanish kids, the immigrants. The book that we are promoting here is called Lost Luggage, and it has been translated into 16 languages. It's a novel. And this is the English translation, but there's also a Chinese translation, which has been published very recently, so we don't have it here yet.
We do, actually.
Oh, we do? Oh, brilliant. Yeah. Sorry, I just assumed that. Yeah, it's not ready yet. So it's available here. So Jordi will mainly refer to this book. Nora Wagener, on my right, is from Luxembourg, a small country which, however, speaks languages of the very powerful neighbors, German and French, but also its own language, which is, as I understand, a kind of mixture of the two, and it's referred to as Luxembourgish in English, Luxembourgish. And Nora is a writer who works both in prose, and she also has written a play. Or have you written more than one? One, okay, but more to come, I'm sure. She has published a novel called with a title which we were discussing actually how to translate it earlier. In the program, it's translated as Love of Humanity and Bird. You told me that you would maybe translate it slightly differently. How would you translate the title?
Maybe human love could be.
Human love.
It's about human relationships all together.
Yeah. And this is, of course, a good example of how problematic translation is, especially when you're translating a title of a book. Your second novel is called E-Galaxies, and maybe you can, I can see it here, and maybe you can tell us when you talk about your work what that means. And you also have a play called Visions. You are part of a theatre collective where you produce plays, you write plays, produce plays, and also you work with young people, for example, you told me, who aspire to working in theatre. And you also organize a series of readings, literary readings. So again, you're sort of part of a literary scene where you're active, not just as a writer, but also as someone who organizes events and is part of a theatre collective. Undine Radzeviciute is from Lithuania. Lithuania is one of the Baltic countries in the northeast of Europe, and it was one of the countries which used to be part of the Soviet Union, but has been now independent for quite a few years. And Undine writes in Lithuanian, but she actually said in one of the previous sessions when we were speaking together that she actually thinks in Russian, which surprised me, but probably it shouldn't, because Russia and the Russian language really had a very powerful hold over these smaller countries. And I imagine you probably, did you receive your education in Russian, or?
No, but all my friends are Russians.
Okay, all right, okay. And of course, nothing against Russian. It's a wonderful language. But I was surprised when you said that you really consider Russian to be a very important language for you and for your work. But your creative work is in Lithuanian, and you have published 5 books, and the one we are going to be talking about is called Fishes and Dragons, and it's partly set in 18th century China, which is surprising because Undine only visited China now. She had not been here before. This is her first visit, so she must have done a lot of research to write this book. And again, we're going to return to the book and talk about it. Owen Martell is a Welsh writer. He grew up in South Wales, and he has now been living in Paris for about 10 years. Is that right? He writes in Welsh, which I was going to say his native Welsh, but it's actually not like that because you really grew up with both languages, Welsh and English. And so some of his writing is in Welsh, but he also has a novel which is available here to buy. It's called Intermission, and that was written in English and has been also translated into several languages, including French. Now let me go back to Jordi. And Jordi, will you tell us about this book? How did you get the idea to write it? It has a kind of unusual plot, to say the least.
No, that will be fine. Yes. Well, the novel, The Lost Luggage, is the story of. I'll tell a little bit about the book, and then I'll tell about how it came the idea. It's the story of Gabriel de la Cruz, who was a truck driver in the 60s and 70s, who moved furniture from Barcelona to other parts of Europe. He, along with two colleagues, used to bring, as I said, all kinds of furniture and transports from around Europe. This allowed him many different things. One, for example, is that with every moving, they would steal one of the boxes. This is very normal, very common. When there's a moving, usually something disappears. So they took it, and then afterwards they would open it and share what's inside the box, like if they were pirates. The second thing is that this gave them a sort of freedom traveling around Europe, because, and this is very important in the novel, I want to portray this Barcelona under the Franco regime, which was a very dark, very grey city where nothing happened, in contrast with the rest of Europe, where there was the May '68, the students' demonstrations in Paris. There was the movement, the hippie movement, '69, the Summer of Love in London, and there was also the movement of the students in Frankfurt at the university. So these guys, they happen to be around with the truck, and by pure chance, they are accidental tourists. I say by pure chance, they are around, and also because they are just sort of, idols of the working class without wanting it, but they are. And Gabriel is like a perfect Don Juan, more in a passive way. He's a womanizer, but he doesn't do anything actually. He's just there. He manages to end up having 4 sons with 4 different women around Europe, and also he manages to give them the same name. So Christopher is born in London, Christophe is born in Paris, Christoph in Germany, in Frankfurt, and Cristofol in Barcelona. The novel starts when the father disappears. No one knows where he's gone. The sons haven't seen him for ages. They don't know about the others. So then suddenly the police in Barcelona contacts them, puts them together, and they realize they are not only child, they are not abandoned children, but they also have half-brothers around Europe who happen to have the same name. So they get together and they start to look for the father, and the way to look for the father is to talk the story of the father, to get together and talk everyone each piece of information about their own families. And this is what brings up the novel together. Let's say it's a quest. I see it as a very, very much as a, sometimes the people say it's a road movie. Well, it's a road novel. But anyway, I see it more like a quest in the, a little bit in the tradition of Cervantes, which is an author that I adore. And, this moving, the fact that I liked a lot the structure of the middle-age literature novels. The knight climbs to a horse and goes out to the adventure. So my characters climb to a truck who has a horse named Pegasus, and they go out to the adventure as well, and just moving and seeing new things. So it happens a lot to them. And I will stop here, and maybe we can talk later.
About your 2 books.
Yeah, I'll try to. My first book was published in Luxembourg in 2011, and as mentioned, I would translate it as Human Love and Bird, even like Come Scream. It's a complicated title. and actually won an award with it in Luxembourg, which I was very glad of, also because there were some harsh critics to it, because I'm not like a straight storyteller. I like to write in fragments with a kind of lyric prose. I'm very fond of language and like to get to the core of words and their meanings, which might not be accessible to all the readers, but which I think is important too. And the story is about a young woman who, after a breakup, makes a trip to her grandmother, who lives in a small town, and she's accompanied by her little sister, with whom she has a special relationship and who stopped talking some years ago. And during this trip, she has enough space and time to rethink things over, and to reflect on all different kinds of emotional relationships that humans have with other people, and how they work and how they evolve with time. And she also learns more about her family history, and especially the history of her grandmother. And the second book, E-Galaxies, was published last year in Germany, and it gathers 3, I would say, longer short stories, which are not really linked by the story itself, but who have similar themes or similar starting points. The 3 main characters try to flee from a recent situation, from a recent living situation or event, and they try to build new little tiny bubbles to live in, but they have different ways of filling the void that appears when you leave a part of your life behind you. And but what happens to them all in the end is quite a classical thing. When you try to flee something, to run away from a part of your history or something that surrounds you, the past only hits you harder. You can't flee from things. Things always come back to you. Yeah.
Do you want to speak in English? Yes, of course I want to speak.
Okay, because we had a discussion about
whether to speak in Russian, but
whether she would be speaking in that Russian, that language. So tell us about the book. How did you get to write a book which is set in 18th century China? And
at first, about this book. My fourth book, Fishes and Dragons, are based in 18th century China. It is about how monks from Europe came to mission in China to convert 3 Chinese Europeans to Christianity. Of course, it was a very long battle and very, very difficult battle, because Chinese emperors were very interested in Western culture, but look at it like in some kind of exotic. And they absolutely were not interested in religion, just occasionally, in a little bit. So they looked at everything, at everything like some kind of fruit, who have something hard inside, yes, and as plum. And emperor like putting all Western culture in his mouth, and after he eat the fruit, spit out what it is inside, and inside was religion. So, it was Christian religion was very powerful and very aggressive, and they won a lot of territories in the world. But in China, it was the first territory where they lost absolutely. And a lot of monks died in China, and my book is based on monks' recollections and books who came back to Europe in the 18th century, and it is based on monks' paintings. Because I'm art historic, so it was for me very easy to understand what it is depicted, and when I saw all pictures of one master, I can tell the story what happened. So this book is telling a story about monk painter who was painting, who painted emperors and his wives here in China.
It also has another line, another
Yes,
storyline.
and this I forgot just yes. The story is told by European girl who live in Eastern Europe, and she is living in Chinatown, and she sees Chinese every day. So it is some kind of reflection of Europeans in 18th century to Chinese, and it is some reflection of contemporary European to Chinese who came to us in Europe.
Thank you. Now, Owen, your novel Intermission. Tell us about it. It's about a musician, and it's also a kind of reconstruction of what happened, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a book in character as a pianist, Bill Evans. Thank you. Who is one of the main figures of considered to be one of the most important jazz piano players of the 20th century. And the book is set in a period in his life, in 1961, when he just started. He was already reasonably well known because he played with Miles Davis on Kind of Blue, and had put out a few albums in his own name. But he just started with his own group, and they'd recorded, they'd played a series of concerts in the Village Vanguard Club in New York, which would be put out later on and become a very iconic album, Sunday at the Village Vanguard. And then 10 days later, his bass player, a man called Scott LaFaro, died in a car accident, which cut short the life of the trio almost as soon as it had started. So this, by all accounts, plunged Bill Evans into crisis of grief in the first place, and then a crisis of an artistic crisis as well, and he disappeared off the scene for a few months. So my book is an attempt to write the missing months from when he learns the news in New York and is taken in by his brother, who also lived in New York at the time. He then goes down to Florida, to where his parents lived, and then the first part is from the point of view of Harry, brother. The second part is from the point of view of his Russian mother. The third part is from the point of view of his Welsh father, or Welsh origin father. And then the fourth part is when he comes back to New York and starts playing again. And that's from the point of view of, sort of from the point of view of Bill Evans, but more from my point of view, or from the author's point of view. So it's a book about grief and music and the way those two things relate to each other.
did you write that book in English, having written? Sorry, why did you write that book in English, having written your other books in Welsh? Was there a particular reason? Apart from the fact that it's set in America, so it may.
Yeah, I don't think that was
something to do with it.
I don't think that was anything to do with it.
No.
No. I think the reasons weren't to do with. They were probably more to do with my own development or my own. I wanted to write a book in English. Sorry, I don't mean that flippantly. I'd written 3 books in Welsh, and I wanted to see if I could write a book in English. And this book had been something that I'd wanted to write for a long time. I wrote another book in the meantime. I went to New York to do some research in 2004. I wrote another book in the meantime, and then in Welsh, and then eventually this book came together a long time later, and a long time after, and yeah, it was to do with the fact that I wanted to see if I could write a book in English. So I think it was a more personal choice than pragmatic in that sense.
No, I wasn't thinking about it being a pragmatic decision. I think sometimes when you deal with a particular place, it really does affect. It may affect the choice of the language. Wouldn't be surprising. But that was the book that eventually traveled, although you're in the sense of being translated. Although your other Welsh books were actually translated through an English translation that hadn't been published. Is that right?
That hasn't been published. No.
No.
It's you, Alexandra, had a lot to do with the translation of my second novel into Serbian, and my short stories into Macedonian. But that sort of speaks volumes about the way publishing is and the way books travel in Europe. I have an agent in London, and so she helped me to find a publisher for my English book. But it's a devil of a job to get her to read stuff that I write in Welsh in translation. She says it's nice, and I have short stories that she likes a lot. I say, I can't stick them in a magazine somewhere or find somewhere to publish them. And she says, sure, yeah, they're nice, but when you're writing something new in English, it's infuriating. It really is, because I don't see a difference. I don't see a qualitative difference in my writing between the Welsh and English. So that only speaks of prejudices on the part of publishers, or not necessarily prejudices, but preformed judgments.
Well, the earlier panel actually, I thought it was really interesting that the two English language authors were talking about the difficulties in getting published when your writing is very experimental, and the publishers really don't know what to do with it, and they personally like it, the editors, but they think, well, how are we going to sell this really? And that's what happens with translations as well. That often, a publisher will say, well, how do we sell this? How do we promote it? What kind of context can we place it in for the reader?
So in that sense, writing in English, my decision to write in English was probably in many ways born out of this frustration of never, and much as it might pain one to have to, not, you know, I don't resent that at all, because I love the English language, and I like writing the English language very much. But it's that kind of thing. You think I've written books and written books that I liked, and written stuff that I thought was good, and yet the frustration at not being able to do very much with it. And go, well, okay, I have to join them then. Which isn't a bad thing, as I say, because it's not as if I'm doing that against my will, but there is an element of, you know, you have to play the game, which has a certain sadness to it.
Now, Undine, the book you were talking about, actually you have just signed a contract, I hope I'm allowed to say that, with an English language publisher, and you told me that you hesitated for some time because the publisher is a small independent publisher based in London, and you saw that maybe you could get a better deal with, you know, a bigger, better-known publisher. But my view is actually that you may be really better off with a small independent publisher, because they will look after you. They will really promote the book. Whereas a big publisher, if they publish a translation, often what happens is that they really do not work with that book, and I think you mentioned that this was really the case with your translation, that you know, they really don't know what to do with it.
Well, yeah, it's a tricky situation. Big publishers only care about big authors. And you are part of a program because they need to have a big program as well, and of course they take care of you and they give you a good advance, but it's not the same. It works in, I think the small publishers, or the medium publishers, not even small publishers, take more care, at least in Europe I'm seeing, take more care of the authors. Also in English, probably it's also a matter of quality, that the medium small publishers are looked by the other publishers in the world. So once you get a translation into English, it's easier to be translated into other languages, just because, you know, it's a sort of display.
So sorry, go on. Yeah, if you want to say something. Yeah.
Distraction.
You said earlier that this book actually really took you on a journey. It made you travel in the end,
yes,
because
very
it was
much.
translated into a number of languages, so you had to travel to promote it.
It was like I gave my characters a lot of traveling, and they gave it back to me after the years. Yeah.
So how important is it to be translated? How important? Each of you actually operates in a, exists in a creatively in a quite sort of smallish scene, literary scene, which would be seen as being marginal, and especially vis-a-vis the larger language scenes. Because you would be kind of next door to the big Spanish territory, and
Yes.
you, Nora, you write in German, but you're really not, so much. I mean, you said your second book was actually published in Germany, which I suppose is progress. But yeah. But do you see yourself actually as part of, as being part of the wider German language literary scene of Germany and Austria and Switzerland?
Not yet.
Not yet.
But also this editor is just it's just across the border from Luxembourg, so it's also even smaller literary scene than in Luxembourg, I think, and they also have problems to get far into Germany, and books have not been translated yet into other languages. They don't travel around, even though I have them in my luggage when I travel, but that doesn't mean a lot. Yeah.
Is it important for you to be translated? I mean, you have...
Well, yes, it is. It is part. You know, I think there are two different things. One, of course, there's the personal pride in being translated, and especially in being read, more than translated, in being read somewhere else, and also how the stories that you tell can be read differently. In my case, because it's a very European novel with a lot of... This is a novel which is written in Catalan, but there's a number of speakers in there who speak Spanish, but there's also the three brothers, so one speaks English, one speaks French, and the other speaks German. So there are sometimes these words, there are words or sentences in this other language. So to me it's a very multilingual story, and the first thing I thought was, I hope it gets translated into these languages, so I can see how, you know, it's like being on the other side of the mirror, or the multiple mirror. Then, once you translate it and you get to the experience, I have to say, I was reflecting on what you told us. You sent us this email asking us to think about, excuse me, to think about if, you know, smaller languages are orbiting around bigger languages. And I'm quite pessimistic. Yes, literatures. Yeah, sorry, not languages. You are right, literatures. And when I see the big picture, I'm quite pessimistic, because in the end, I don't think that not even, you know, big languages take care of other big literatures. I mean, I don't think the Germans look at the Spanish, especially, or the Spanish to the French, or the French to the Italian. I think what happens here is that there's this big sun, which is English speaking, and English as a lingua franca, and this sort of controls everything. This is what, also because the agents that they gather in Frankfurt Book Fair and the publishers, they all turn around this idea of being in English. So of course it's very helpful when you're translated into English, because this makes a bridge to other languages, but at the same time I sense that it may be also a problem as long as they think they don't need to go further away. For example, I realize that in the last years, whenever, especially American market, but also English market, whenever they want to publish, for example, an Afghani writer, they don't go to Afghanistan and look for a writer. They look for an Afghani immigrant who writes in English and tells the story of Afghanistan, which may be very nice, but writes it in English. The same happens with other countries, smaller countries, countries where there's more difficulty to, you know, to express and to show. So this is, in a way, it works very well as to spread literature, spread novels, but also sort of diminishes them. It makes them, okay, you are part of us or you are not, right? Then when I go to the smaller picture, for example, and I look what happens in Catalan and also in Spain, in the Spanish literary scene, I see that in the last years, last maybe 8 years, I don't know if it's the same in, you will tell me in other literatures, I see that as a sort of reaction, they have started many small publishers, independent publishers, who react to the commercialization, who trust more in the, you know, the literary books which may be more experimental or less commercial, if you want, but they end up finding a way among the readers. So I think this is a good, it's always the local and the universal, which becomes, you know, a sort of different perspective.
What do you think about this idea of how European literatures or literary scenes, are they interconnected? Do they influence each other, or do we have this influence sort of emanating from the English language center? And it's also interesting to look at the fact that it's really only from English that bestsellers are being translated. Complete, you know, trash is being translated from English, but that doesn't happen the other way around from any other language. So when we actually talk about about the small number of books that are translated into English. One significant factor is that all the other languages actually translate more, but a large part of that more is actually our books, which are, completely worthless. And how that happens, I'm not quite sure, but it is like that. I mean, you don't have the equivalent of Daniel Steele translated from French or Spanish or German. We have South American soap operas on television, so that could be the equivalent. But it's an interesting phenomenon, and so would you say? I mean, are you influenced by writing that you read in translation or directly, and vice versa? Do you feel that? Where you write from, that scene influences other literary scenes.
To answer the last question first, the literary scene that I am ostensibly part of doesn't influence anybody anywhere, and I'm not even sure it influences the writers that are part of it. For a long time, it's no longer true now, but for a long time it was the case. People used to say of Welsh language writing that each novelist was his own school, or his or her own school of writing. It's
very lonely.
Yeah, yes. I don't think it's the case anymore, because there are more novelists these days, which is good. What was the first part of the question?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, yeah, of course. Well, it's one-way traffic in the sense that before I learned French, the only other language I read apart from Welsh was English. But that English has enabled me to read, I think. I can't remember. I haven't got a top 10 in my head, but I know that there aren't many writers, native writers of English, on that list. So the importance of translation is obvious, and it's plain. But beyond saying that, it's it's probably no bad thing that Mark Levy, who is the equivalent of Daniel Steele in French, the world doesn't need that. But the point that you make is entirely valid. That English has this place in the world. Just it's the way it is. And Wales, if England is the sun, Wales is the little spot that gets obliterated because it's so close that it's too close to have to be visible properly outside of its own orbit.
Well, I'm always surprised at how much is translated actually from Wales into a language like Czech. You definitely have a following in the Czech Republic. And I think it may have something to do with a certain fascination with things Celtic. That's
but this is why it's endlessly interesting to live in. Jordi's been mentioning the fact that you can drive through 4 or 5. I'll steal your line there. You can drive through 4 or 5 countries in a day and hear 6 or 7 languages. It's within that sort of smorgasbord of there will be affinities. So we can only hope and encourage affinities between. If everything has to pass through English, then those affinities between Czech and Welsh, say, or between Italian and Spanish, or between German and Swedish, or I don't know, if we all have to pass through English, then the chances of those things happening are less, and that's to be regretted.
What are the influences in Lithuania? I mean, who are the major writers that influenced you, or your peers, or the younger generation?
You know, it is almost as in Welsh. So everybody have a lot of influences from around. So even from contemporary culture. And when you ask me about my thinking in Russian, the biggest influence is this, the language, not books, but exactly the language. What I wanted to say. For instance, Lithuanian language is very old and preserved, and we can't write almost 60% of words I need to throw out if I want something to write. Russian language is very modern. It's very powerful. Its expression is very powerful, and when you think in Russian and choose the words in Lithuanian, it became absolutely another kind of literature, and something what I wanted to write. Another thing is, Western culture lost seeking of wisdom, and Russian culture, as Dostoevsky, Chekhov, they always were looking for wisdom as Eastern cultures, as Chinese, as Arabian world. So such things, of course, impacts me a lot.
Nora, where do your influences come from?
First, I have to say that my mother tongue is Luxembourgish, but we grow up very multilingual right from the beginning. We have 3 official languages, which are German, French, and Luxembourgish. So we are always able to read a lot of classics in the original language, which is for me very valuable, and I hope for everybody else in Luxembourg it is too. But at some point I decided to write in German, although it's a foreign language to me, and I'm still in a learning process, and I learn something about the language every day. And then maybe even the day that I stop being curious about German, I might start writing in another language. So every Luxembourgish author just chooses one language, so there is a possibility to be spread out in the world, but we don't have we're kind of a baby shoes in what means a literary scene. We have no agencies for anything, but we have a lot of influences coming to us. So for us, it's really a one-track way. But everything, the whole literary background from all these, from Germany and from France, and even there are some people writing in English too, that always leaves strong marks in the writing, but always in kind of a mixture, always some kind of freestyle we do, and because we write in a foreign language, most of us do.
Well, in my case, the influences, if I think of the form of the language, I have to think of the Catalan that was around in the 1920s, and which is a Catalan mainly from journalists, also journalists who were living in Barcelona in that time. You know that because during the Franco regime, Catalan was a banned language. There are like 45 to 50 years where there's almost very, very little expression in Catalan, and what was published under censorship, so it doesn't count that much. So when you write today, you have to go back, you have to jump back to the 1920s, at that time where journalism, and especially Barcelona, was a connected city with the whole of Europe. I find, the same kind of cosmopolitan life that you could find in Paris or in Berlin, you could find it in Barcelona. And these people were writing with the same frenzy of the city and the same kind of interesting style, not only journalism, but also some fiction. So when I look at this, when I want to write, I look at these people and I read them all the time. I think nowadays that the writers of the new generation, for the last 20 years, we have overcome the problems of growing up with a tradition that has been stopped for so many years. And I think we are proposing now a new Catalan model, but it's literally works very well, and it's very connected to the reality of the country and of the people. When I think in terms of story and what I want to tell, I look back at the tradition of storytelling. I like the storytelling, as I said before, Cervantes. I like the storytelling of the 1001 Nights. This feeling that in any moment, if anyone wants to tell a story, it can be told, and something will come out from that, right? There's always a possibility of build a new world, and I'm talking more like metaphorically, right? To build new stories coming from just the idea that you sit around and you start talking.
I think it's time for you to ask questions. Does anyone have a question? Is there a microphone? If there are any questions?
Come on. Hey, Casper.
I don't know if mine is a question or just a comment. You be the judge. Maybe you have something to say to it. We are talking about diversity and the sort of the power of translating stories from different literatures and what that can mean to the European corpus or even the world literary corpus. I'm thinking about this, the major sort of literary fashions that we've had the last 50 years, one being magic realism and the other being these Nordic noir or crime novels. And they are not happening in the centers of power. They didn't happen in the English literature. The developments were in Latin America and the Nordic countries. And what I see those two fashions had in common was the fact that, well, first of all, there was a reality that was kind of gripping, in the case of Latin America, the rural violence and a certain escapism that you see in literature of that reality. And in the case of the Nordic literatures, it's this reflection of isolation, perhaps, and the need to find a way to communicate is something that pervades this genre. So those two fashions, what they have in common is that they transcend boundaries or frontiers. My reflection is that if you want to perhaps push literature into new avenues, you have to look at the margins and you have to look at these sort of crossings, this literature across frontiers that probably, sort of writers thinking about their realities, but at the same time thinking about, transcending the particular national milieu and perhaps going a level up, upper level. So in the case of Latin America, thinking as Latin Americans, not as Colombians or Argentinians or Chileans and all that. So I don't know if you have anything to say to that.
I do. I certainly do. I think, I think you make a point very interesting. And some things I agree with you, some others I don't see so clearly. I think that the South American boom was much more interesting in literature terms than the Nordic one that you're mentioning. That one was started really because there was something new with it, and it started in Spain, then it went to Europe, and from Europe went to other countries and went to the UK and the Anglo-Saxon market. And in the case of the Nordic literature, it's more like a genre, which is very good, but it starts straight from the commercial proposal of the UK, and then goes to other countries. I'm sure what you said, which is very valuable to me, is the idea that in the margins there's always very good literature, and the only thing is that they don't know it. And for example, I'm sure that in Israel right now there's great crime novels, and maybe there are a couple of good authors that could be known as well as the other ones, but they may not be because there is no one there to publish them in English, or maybe they have been published but not with the same level of interest or commercial interest. It's the same case with Roberto Bolaño. You know, Roberto Bolaño was a great writer, but he only managed to be known around when he published in English. And he had been published actually in America before by New Directions, a small publisher, and only when FSG picked him and turned, he used to publish small novels. So finally, when he gets this big novel, The Savage Detectives, then FSG picks him, he dies in the process, and he gets a lot of promotion. If this had not happened, he probably would have been one of the many authors that are around, like Cesar Aira in Argentina, which is a very valuable author who is being published right now in the US, but it has not the same level of interest. So I think that the problem probably is that now all the big hits can only happen if they happen commercially. I tend to think that in Europe is a bit different. For example, if you remember the phenomenon, I don't know if you say the phenomenon, the phenomenon or the hype that some 10 years ago was with Sándor Márai. You know, Sándor Márai is a Hungarian author and who has these wonderful novels, and then suddenly there's an Italian publisher, quite not a mass market publisher, but quite a good in selections, who published a novel by Sándor Márai, and then suddenly the other European publishers look around and they say, okay, we should do it, and it suddenly becomes a big success in all the literatures. In publishing in Spain, it was a big success, in Catalan quite well, in French, in Germany. And this, after that, jumps to the US, and it also probably gets a good margin of sales. But to me, this is more genuine. There's a publisher there who publishes because he likes the book, not because he thinks that this will sell a lot of books. That's, to me, it's kind of a difference. But I keep saying that I like a lot what you said.
Sándor Márai, what was also interesting about it was that he was published. He found this fame posthumously. He had already died, so you couldn't even think, okay, this author will help me promote the book, because he's no longer around. Yeah, it was a very interesting case, and it was also interesting that the English translation of Embers, which was the first book that made a big splash, was actually made from German, because the publishers were so keen to publish it very quickly that they didn't even bother to look for a Hungarian translator, So that was one of those kind of infamous cases of what can happen when a publisher wants to follow the fashion. Any other questions? Yes, here.
I have a question for the entire panel. How much influence do you think that maybe each country's language policy have on the maybe the language or writing choice for the younger generation writers, and also how much the influence of maybe the spread of technology, since English has become the predominant language on the internet and on so many areas? What is the impact of the technology also on the language choice for the younger generation? Thank you.
It's a very good question, I think.
Language policy has had, I mean, in Wales, in the specific context of the Welsh language, when Welsh language schools opened their doors, when children started receiving education in Welsh again after however many decades it was, we're starting to see now, that was in the 60s and 70s, we're starting to see now the fruits of that, and there are lots more people who've been educated through the medium of Welsh, who write through the medium of Welsh, and write fantastic stuff. There are some great writers in Welsh in Wales at the moment. So language policy, and with that, and technology, to answer the second point as well, goes a long way in breaking previously held stigmas around the language. So for a long time, in the same way that Catalan was censored under Franco, Welsh was also punished. People were punished for speaking Welsh at school, but in a period slightly before the period in question for Catalonia. But now there's a whole generation of people who grow up with the internet, who've grown up with Welsh, and it's really fantastic. So I'm sort of at the tail end of the internet generation. I use the internet, but I don't use it as avidly or as fervently as people who are younger than me. But it's great to see. I love seeing in Welsh, for example, there are lots of people who there's a whole terminology around various aspects of new technology that's sprung up organically just because of the fact that there are users who want to use this stuff and they want to use it in Welsh, and they make their own, they don't make their own words. There's a consensus that you see language at work, you see the consensus being sort of arrived at. Well, yeah, just by democratically by people sort of coming together and deciding to express this thing together. It's a very beautiful thing.
I just have one quick additional question. Maybe just guessing from my knowledge, Welsh probably is the best preserved Celtic language right now. Are you worrying about like your Celtic brothers, like Irish and probably Manx is already dead, and Breton is on the verge of dying, and so many other languages.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been writing a play recently with it's a co-production between the National Theatre in Wales and a theatre in Brittany. So I've been going back and forth to Brittany quite a bit, and the lady, the girl I've been writing with in Brittany has become a friend. You're always the lesser of someone and the master of someone. So I've met Jordi in the last week, and I'm insanely jealous of the Catalans. But then I go to Brittany, and the Bretons are insanely jealous of the Welsh. It's desperately sad. I've had a lot of conversations with my Breton friend about the difficulties she faces in not just in sort of writing and expressing her artistic and vision in Breton, but raising her children. Languages aren't don't die, they're killed. I believe that very strongly.
I don't know. I mean, sometimes, because you mentioned all these really, small Celtic languages. There's Scottish Gaelic, which is being supported. There's a lot of investment by the Scottish government, but it's really spoken by very few people. And that may be because there is English, but there's also Scots, and Scots is quite strong. So it's often, a kind of complex relationship maybe between the languages that are present in that territory. I remember a friend of mine who is an Algerian Francophone poet, and she's constantly being told, why do you write, in the language of the colonizers or whatever, and she says, well, to start with, I may also speak Arabic, and I actually translate between Arabic and French, but my mother tongue is Berber, is Tamazight. So for me, the Arabic language and culture is equally, the culture of the oppressor. So one always has to sort of think of these, complex relationships. But I know Irish speakers are also very jealous of the Welsh, and Irish publishers say how the Welsh publishers are being pampered and so on, and Irish language writers sometimes say sort of bitterly that there are more writers in Irish than readers. Yeah. Do you want to say something about language policy in Luxembourg?
Yeah, it's complicated in Luxembourg. We do learn a lot of languages, but we don't learn our own language. We don't learn at school how to write it, or how to, and then of course how to read it. A lot of people have problems to read their own language because they're not used to it. And there's nothing done about that in a way. And I don't think that in the future more young people will write in Luxembourgish, and there are also some ways, like we had a time in the 80s where there were a lot of Luxembourgish novels because publishers arise, publishing houses, small ones. And then there's a vague French influences more, and then German again. It always goes up and down. But when people also started to ask, why do you write in German? It's not your mother tongue. I was starting wondering about it, and then I remembered when I started writing, I didn't even know how to write it, and it would be so dumb to misspell every second word, and I think I was too lazy back then to learn it by myself. Now I can correctly write it because I wanted to know how to write it.
Luxembourgish codified in any way? Does it have a standard spelling, for example?
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
It has. It also has a spell checker program nowadays, so you can check it.
These things aren't to be. That's not to be
progress.
sniffed at. These are incredible developments. I've worked as a translator as well, and in the last 15 years, last 20 years, when since we've had Welsh spell checkers and online dictionaries and these kinds of things, it's from when I started translating to now, the difference is incredible. And machine translation of Welsh, which is actually very good, to be manipulated by humans. Of course, I'm not talking about automatic, just machine-based translation. These are incredible things, incredibly powerful tools, and they are, I think, a source of optimism. There should no longer be misspellings, whether it be in Luxembourgish, Welsh, or English. That should be a thing of the past.
I think actually spell check, software makes you lazy.
Yes, sure, yeah, sure, yeah. No, that's also true.
I think actually some of you already mentioned it, if I understood it correctly, but I still want to ask the question to be completely sure what to think about it. Like very often is mentioned that globalization and the dominance of English, or let's say of some big languages like Russian, Arabic, German, French, will inevitably lead to the long-term extinction of small languages. But actually, I think, if I understood correctly, that most of you are of the opinion that now the digital age, and actually with new media, this is actually a key to the promotion of small languages. Do you think in the long run this is something which will continue? Like, do you think, can we go so far to say that the digital age actually rescues minority languages? Or is like
quite honestly, probably not. To an extent, yes, but probably in the long run, probably not.
I heard my brother, he sent me a link recently on something called like digital humanities, like, and I heard of like a problem of a project like the Venice the Venice book project. Well, I forgot the name. Basically, it's about digitalizing all the old archives of ancient Venice. I mean, these theoretically, if you play this game even farther, you could like bring even more, well, you can bring ancient languages back to life, and people just out of a habit could start speaking languages which are extinct long ago.
Akkadian.
Akkadian, yeah. Babylonian.
I don't know, I disagree with you. I think this is a very good point, actually, because you now have resources that actually help you maintain the language and also help others learn it. And there are apps to learn Welsh. I have one on my phone, and what I don't have is the time to to play with it. But if you think of some very small languages, very small European languages that coexist often with a larger language, like for instance Maltese, spoken by 300,000 people. And it has a blossoming literature. The Maltese writers, it is a new literature, but Maltese writers used to be, the older generation used to write in English, and English and Maltese are co-official languages, so both are used. But the younger generation, they definitely, write in Maltese, and they use both languages very comfortably. Icelandic is another example. Again, roughly 300 speakers, great literary culture, going back to the sagas. But also, it's a country which was. I wouldn't say that the language kind of became...
I've read recently that Icelandic is facing not inconsiderable threat from the fact that... I've read recently that Icelandic is facing a not inconsiderable threat from the fact that they all speak such good English. And that because nobody's learning Icelandic, they're in Iceland, they're far from everywhere.
Well, there was more threat from Danish, I think, at some point, and many Icelanders actually, studied in Denmark and so on. So I think that's where this threat came from. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to dispute what you're saying. But
No,
I think
I don't know enough either.
If I may add something, also Danish feel the threat of English. And
oh yes,
all the time. And I talked once to a publisher who told me that they actually need, whenever they want to publish an English author, maybe English-American authors who are very well known, they need to publish them right at the same time that the original.
Yeah.
Like Paul Auster, they need to publish it right at the same time, because if they wait 1 month, all the people who want to read it just go straight to the English.
Yeah.
They don't wait for the Danish translation. And this, I think, will happen more and more everywhere. So what I find is that there will be we will go to two extremes. One is the presence of English everywhere, And maybe there will come a time, especially on the net, that all the news will come in English and will be valuable, and then there will be an atomization of languages, because the media is easier, and everyone will be able to find all the possible languages, as you were saying. But of course, this demands being active. You do it. You cannot wait there to receive the language. You have to go there and look for it, and this makes a difference. Sorry, for example, for my experience in Catalan, what happened just after Franco? All the policies you were asking about, language policies. All the policies were like a positive discrimination of Catalan. For example, in the schools, students don't learn both languages at the same time. They just basically learn Catalan, and they have 2 hours a week of Spanish. But they realize that the pressure of Spanish is so big in the society that they end up learning both languages at the same time. And actually, students from Catalonia are the ones who have the best qualifications in Spanish from the rest of Spain as well. So I guess this will happen in all the languages with English, probably. We now facing it. You will have to have positive discrimination of your own language in your country in order to battle the presence, the abominable presence of English, if you want to say it like that. Then the second part, which was very interesting, and this may help also for smaller literatures, is that the Catalan government set funding to buy. This no longer happens, by the way, because of the crisis. But for many years, it set a funding to buy 200 copies of every Catalan book that had been published. They bought it in, I don't know, half the price, but anyway, it meant a difference for the publisher, who could, risk a little bit more, and also these books went to libraries. So people who couldn't buy books in Catalan went to the libraries and took them. And now we have a great net of libraries with a big presence of Catalan, and now it feels like pretty a normal country. The only difference is, of course, the fact that there's not a state behind, Catalan state, but for the rest, I think it's pretty normal, the usage of the language and also the bilingualism, how it works. I think it's helpful for everyone.
Just a very quick comment on what you were saying. I think this is happening actually everywhere in Scandinavia, and I think that the issue there is that what you need are language policies, and for instance, what we need is a language policy that would actually ban the use of English in higher education. And why English is used in higher education is that everywhere in Europe now universities have to actually make money. So what do they do to attract students from abroad and to kind of beat the competition from Britain? They teach in English. And there are specific disciplines. I know, for instance, art schools practically everywhere now teach in English. And I'm sure that, So
there was a time when to be a good scholar in Welsh, you had to speak German, because you had to go and read the Zeitschrifts of Celtic philology, which were in German.
And here we are all having this conversation
in English.
In China.
Yes, in China, yes. Well, I think if you have any more questions, you can ask them over a drink. And I'd like to thank the authors, our panelists, and I would like to thank the audience. And let's give each other a hand of applause.
Thank you.